How do you feel about schools teaching children about gender orientation and gender identity?
I think that's part of teaching. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I was too quick.
Okay. In California, we are already starting those kinds of teachings, and parents have been very upset and outraged. As a parent, I actually am in full support of these teachings. How would you feel about it for the rest of the country?
So I believe this is about teaching children about our world. And of course we should teach them about our world. We should teach them about people. We should teach them about differences. So I strongly support this. And I support doing this in age-appropriate ways from the time they're very young.
He issues a transgender troop ban when he denies the rights of our fellow Americans because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, or who describes immigrants as rapists and criminals, and in a country that loses 40,000 of our fellow Americans to gun violence every year. You have racism, intolerance, and hatred, and it is more armed today than it ever was before. So what is our solution to that? In addition to all the things that we talked about so far and standing up against intolerance and hatred and homophobia, we also need to disarm it. There is discrimination against our fellow Americans, as well as discrimination against those who are coming to this country. I think about asylum seekers, families who are separated based on the HIV status of a single family member. We don't do that for families who come here with the flu or other healthcare challenges right now in this country. We've singled out a population in America.
Dozens of states in this country, a person can be prosecuted for not revealing their HIV status. For example, in Texas and South Dakota, a person can face up to 15 years in prison for not disclosing their status, even if it's undetectable, which means that they cannot spread it, right? Which means they cannot give it to their partner, can't transmit it. Should these laws be overturned?
I think they should. I think the goal has to be equal treatment, which we've been talking about here today, non-discrimination in America, and it also has to be on the public health needs of our fellow Americans. So instead of being focused on penalizing or punishing or incarcerating people with HIV, what if we focused on stopping the spread of HIV?
How I had stepped across the line saying that I support gay marriage and I thought it was constitutionally eligible, and so on and so forth. There was a lot of talk about how I, among some, not the president, some in our administration, I may cost the election and all that kind of stuff. And I made a bet. I won't mention the individuals, but people you know in the administration. And I said, I'll make you a bet. I'll make you a bet, like almost everything, the American public's way ahead of us. That well over half the American public supports gay marriage already. That week, a poll was taken, the first one I'd seen, showing that I think it was 57% of all Americans supported gay marriage. The generic point I'm making here is, folks, the vast majority of people in America are not homophobic.
Sort of had an exchange with Vice President Mike Pence. You said, if you've got a problem with who I am, your problem is not with me. Your quarrel, sir, is with my Creator. Do you believe God made you gay?
Well, the decision was definitely made way above my pay grade. And if you belong to the Christian tradition that I belong to, then you believe that God loves you, and you look around and you notice that you're gay, and those two things exist at the same time. And I would also say that nothing has made me feel more connected, more able to be true, however imperfectly, to my faith, than the experience of putting myself second that came with committing my life to my husband, Chastity. And I really feel that marriage moved me closer to God, and I wish the VP could understand that.
I know when, I'm sure you are confronted by people often who don't like you based on your sexual orientation, your identity, who say to you, it is a sin. What do you say to that? Is being gay a sin?
I don't believe it is. I also get that people reach their own understandings of their own faith. I guess where I try to reach people is that, can we at least agree that whatever faith tradition or commitment they have agrees with mine, that we are called to compassion, that we are called to seek out in one another what is best, and that we are supposed to protect those who are vulnerable. And my hope is that for people, and let's recognize that this journey toward the right side of history is going to be hard, especially for somebody maybe from an older generation who was brought up their entire life to reject just who I am and how I love. And my goal is not to push those people right back into the arms of the religious right, but rather to call them in the name of compassion that I know everyone feels toward a greater acceptance, even if they're still trying to understand.
First of all, I think it's absolutely critical that anti-discrimination laws be applied very clearly and severely in terms of the LGBTQ community. Second of all, I think it's absolutely critical in the military that there be senior members of this community so that, in fact, the ideas and the feelings are represented directly, not indirectly. Whether that appointment should be a specific appointment to a specific job is a different question. What I believe is we need members of this community at senior levels across the government.
Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. Wait, no, here's the thing I want to say. I have been working with the transgender community since the 90s. Early in my career, one of the populations within the transgender community that I worked closely with were transgender teenagers. You know, there are a lot of the leaders, early leaders in the trans community who came from San Francisco, and so we brought in these leaders to talk about the community, to talk about how the issue is playing out, to talk about the injustices. And it ended up being a model for what needs to happen around also what we do around public safety to make sure that it does not go without consequence.
When we had our hateful amendment that was on our ballot that would have banned same-sex marriage.
Yes, I would like to encourage you and your fellow candidates to hire Black, trans women and men in senior leadership in your campaigns and if you're elected in government. So there's your career coaching.
Okay, very good.
So you co-sponsored the Sesta Fosta Act, which made it harder for sex workers to protect themselves by vetting clients online and harder for law enforcement to track potential criminals who may harm, kidnap, or even kill sex workers. I'm a vice president of the Stonewall Democratic Club, which is the nation's oldest LGBTQ feminist and progressive political group, and a lot of our constituents are current and former sex workers. Many of them are people of color, many of them are trans, many of them are undocumented immigrants. So my question for you is, will you come out in favor of legalizing sex work, and what will you do to counteract the negative impact this law has had?
Okay, thank you.
I currently identify as non-binary. In California, I am able to change my gender to X. However, on the federal level, there is no such option. Will you recognize third gender markers on a federal level?
Yes, thank you, I will. And I think there's also, I think that there is a lot of work we need to do all over the country with driver's licenses, as you know. Not every state has some of the provisions that California have in place, and just work on a state-by-state basis to make those changes.
Challenges that members of the LGBTQ community are facing. These are folks who are applying for asylum in the United States, but in an unprecedented way, the Trump administration is making them remain in Mexico until their asylum claim is adjudicated. But the 8 members of the LGBTQ community that I was there with, they were fleeing persecution, violence, threats, and they're experiencing those same kinds of things right now. And so they should never have been put into that program in the first place. They deserve asylum. And, just like we went over there to highlight justice for them, as president, I will make sure that we act toward justice for all members of the LGBTQ community, whether they're in the United States, whether they're seeking asylum, or whether they live in other countries. If I'm elected president, the first order of business on January 20th, 2021 will be to have a catalog of all of the different executive actions that this president, this administration has taken, including exemptions that they've created or rolled back to that allow people to discriminate against the LGBTQ community using as the reason their religion or the excuse their religion. I will go back to what we did in the Obama administration and then take it to the next level to protect the LGBTQ community.
Okay, and I will, number one, changed the Trump administration's guidance back to what the Obama administration's guidance was, that schools should allow people to use the bathrooms that conforms with their gender identity. But we cannot stop there. We must use our Department of Justice and our Department of Education's Civil Rights Division to go after schools that are denying people equal rights and equal protections. So many of these issues, what will you do? I just want you to know that I have spent my life working on LGBTQ issues. I'm one of the lead original sponsors of the Equality Act. And so again, I will not wait for the Supreme Court, because with the right-wing justices that this president has appointed, they're not just looking to roll back LGBTQ rights, but we see it already, a rollback of civil rights, a rollback of voting rights, a rollback we're seeing across this country because of federal judges on a woman's right to control their own body. And so we have got to make sure we enshrine everything from Roe v. Wade to the Voting Rights Act. We need to do legislation in Congress once and for all. And the Equality Act is essential. It is essential that nowhere in America, and right now the majority of states in America, you can post your pictures of your wedding on your Facebook page, but the next day you could be fired just because you are gay. That goes against every one of our core values in this nation. And we are not free when we swear an oath, all of us swear an oath that we'll be a nation of liberty and justice for all. Those are aspirational words right now until every LGBTQ American has equal rights, and I will get the Equality Act passed and into law in our country.
One aspect of it is that you want to decriminalize HIV transmission. States have laws that make that a crime. How do you deal with it on the state level? Do you try to get legislation? Is that something you negotiate? How would you deal with the decriminalization?
There's something called federal preemption. So when you have a federal law that conflicts with a state law, then the federal law takes precedence. So in the same way that we have passed federal laws to protect people from being discriminated against, and you don't have to rely on state law, we can do the same thing here on decriminalization, and that's what I commit to fight for.
All right.
My name is Jacob, and I'm a 9-year-old transgender American. My question is...
All right, Jacob. Hold on.
What will you do in your first week as president to make sure that kids like me feel safer in schools? And what do you think schools need to do better to make sure that I don't have to worry about anything but my homework?
Oh, I like that question, Jacob.
On the very first day, there should be steps taken to undo the example that Mr. Trump and Mr. Pence have laid for the country. That would mean undoing the ban on transgender military people. It would mean undoing the ban on visas for same-sex partners of foreign diplomats. But it would also mean appointing people from the LGBTQ community to high important parts of the administration as an example of what we are. When I think about why I started the Need to Impeach campaign 2 years ago, yeah, he's a criminal. It's true that he more than has earned impeachment, but it goes much beyond this, and it goes to exactly this kind of issue. The actual President of the United States committing crimes against humanity like this in our name is something that we should end right now, certainly the first day of my presidency.
And Mr. Starr, some of the other candidates in this race, some of who were on stage tonight, would create a special envoy within the State Department to deal with LGBTQ rights. Is that something that would happen in a Steyer administration as well?
I want to start by saying that ICE detention centers are an LGBT issue. LGBT asylum seekers are being denied parole in detention centers across the country. 2 have died in ICE custody in the past 2.5 years due to lack of access to HIV care. At least 24 immigrants have died in the past 3 years in ICE custody. Will your administration be ready from day one to put in place strong measures and penalties to increase oversight over healthcare access, HIV healthcare access, in detention centers across the country and save lives of LGBT asylum seekers?
Rita, of course we will. I mean, what we've seen from ICE in terms of inhumanity, this is a perfect example, but it's not the only example. I think it's absolutely critical for the United States of America to treat people in a humane and decent fashion. It's very obvious that this president and this administration has chosen to not only break the international laws in their treatment of asylum seekers, but to break the basic laws of humanity. I know that there are 71 countries in the world that openly discriminate against members of the LGBTQ community. And I know that the United States, as a value-driven country, where we're projecting to the world what we care about, what we're willing to do about it, and the kind of world that we're trying to create with our democracy and freedom-loving partners, should definitely include a specific attempt to represent the rights of LGBTQ people who live outside the United States.
My pronouns are she, her, and hers.
She, her, and her? Mine too.
All right. Sat in that United States Supreme Court during the arguments where I refused to defend Proposition 8, which banned same-sex marriages in California. We are still at a point in this country where people are treated differently under the law based on sexual orientation. And the thing that I say to anybody is this: can you defend in our country, where we say we are a country of laws, that United States Supreme Court literally etched in marble, it says equal under the law, right? Justice under the law, equal. How can we ever defend that our LGBTQ brothers and sisters are treated differently under the law when they walk into their place of work? It is a fundamental issue as far as I'm concerned. We saw great success in terms of marriage, but if we are going to be honest about it, there is still not full equality for members of the LGBTQ community, and that relates to housing, it relates to employment, it relates to education, and so many other issues. And so our fight is ongoing, and I will stand proudly and strongly until we reach full equality for everyone. Because it was a day where people who love each other had the ability for their love to be recognized by law. Back when a lot of Democrats were talking about civil unions, in February of 2004, I was performing marriages. What's it to you if same-sex couples get married? It's not impacting your right to get married, your ability to get married. What's it to you, right?
Or that we ensure that we make violence against trans women, especially trans women of color, a national law enforcement priority. And in Texas, as you alluded to, debated a transgender bathroom bill in our state amidst an epidemic of violence against transgender Americans, especially trans women of color. Texas, unfortunately, leads the country in violence against trans women of color. And I'm thinking of Italy Marlowe, who was just murdered in Houston, Texas right now, and other women who are killed with virtual impunity in the United States of America. But here's why we have cause for hope. There are grassroots organizations like Equality Texas who are standing up for the full civil rights of every American and stopped that bathroom bill in Texas.
Do you think religious institutions like colleges, churches, charities, should they lose their tax-exempt status if they oppose same-sex marriage?
Yes. Like signing into law the Equality Act so that the full civil rights of every single American are going to be respected. And setting the moral example so we can exert the moral leadership across the world and make this a cornerstone of our foreign policy. In fact, I'm going to have a full-time person in the State Department who works with other countries to advocate for the full human rights of their citizens as well. But we won't wait on those countries to change. If someone needs to come here to seek shelter or asylum or refuge, we are going to welcome them now. I was in a synagogue in New York not too long ago where they welcome refugees and asylum seekers from around the world, predominantly from the LGBTQ community. And what those asylum seekers told me really made an impact on me. In many cases, they had to leave because their families had rejected them. They were not welcome back at home. They come to this country, strangers in a strange land, not speaking the language, and a country that is seeing record levels of intolerance and homophobia against their community. They need help right now, and as president, I will make sure that we provide that help, that we treat asylum seekers with the dignity and respect that they deserve as human beings, and no one is disqualified for being different. We bring everyone in, understand that is the foundation of our success, our strength, and also our safety and our security. I'm going to listen to trans women of color. They will be the guide on this issue. They will direct our policy. Extraordinarily important for our president to speak in terms of pride and celebration of those who make this country great in the first place, to reject the service of transgender Americans who put their lives on the line for this country, who are willing to sacrifice their lives, and in many cases have, saving the lives of countless Americans. That has sent a signal to people in this country that both hatred and violence is okay, at least according to our current president. So I think it's really important from the highest office in the land to set the standard, to speak in the most positive terms, to overturn that transgender troop ban on day one, and to make stopping this epidemic of violence against trans women a top priority for the United States of America. I was born and raised a Catholic, and there was a Catholic priest at the lectern during the call to the public telling me that what I was doing was welcoming an abomination to God. And he and I really got into it at that podium, a very politically unpopular position for us to take in the council. It sparked recall elections and citizen-driven petitions, but I knew it was the right thing to do, not just for those city employees, but for any child who was reading the newspaper, watching TV, or who wanted to know what those in positions of power and public trust thought about them. And what we were saying from the El Paso City Council is you're every bit as important, every bit as valuable, every bit as much an American and a human being as anyone else, and we're going to treat you the same as everybody else. So defying the religious condemnation that I received from a Catholic priest as a lifelong Catholic, defying the polls and the politics of the moment, and just doing the right thing,
which is
because it was
a
the right
widely
thing to do.
discredited
Allow the
practice that
politics
seeks to change a
catch
person's
up.
sexual orientation or possibly their gender identity.
Yeah.
Should this be illegal? And if it is illegal, what should the punishment be?
It should be illegal. As president, we will seek to outlaw it everywhere in this country. In my opinion, this is tantamount to torture, a torture that we're visiting on children who are absolutely defenseless. And so we're going to make sure that whatever the penalty is, it is steep enough to dissuade anybody from entering into this practice or being able to torture kids with the kind of impunity that we have seen so far.
Black trans women are being killed in this country, and CNN, you have erased black trans women for the last time. Let me tell you something. Black trans women are dying. Our lives matter. I'm an extraordinary black trans woman, and I deserve to be here. My black trans sisters that are here, I am tired. I am so tired. I'm just sitting there, and it's not just my black trans women, it's my black trans brothers too. And I'm going to say what I'm going to say. I'm going to say what I'm going to say.
Come here. No, I just want to ask you something. Come here. Tell me. Come here. I want you to talk. What's your name?
I'm Blossom C. Brown.
Blossom, let me ask you.
Google me.
Blossom.
Please Google me.
Blossom, thank you. Let me tell you something. No, don't come on the stage. Don't come on the stage. May I have the mic? Okay. May I have the mic? Blossom, let me tell you something.
Baby, your actions have to speak louder than words, because guess what? Not one black trans woman has taken the mic tonight. Not one black trans man has taken the mic tonight.
Yeah.
Show me.
Blossom.
Show me.
Blossom. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Blossom, you're a black trans woman. You have the mic in your hand. I've taken it and given it back to you. We want to hear from you. We have had trans people of color. We've had all people here, and you're welcome. But we are proud and happy that you're here. We're proud and happy that you're here. Yes, but remember, we're on our time constraint. All right. Thank you, Blossom, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's how anti-blackness works amongst people of color. That's what anti-blackness looks like. The erasure of black trans people.
All right.
I'm here. We're here in this room. Please give us that opportunity.
Blossom, thank you so much, and we appreciate you. Thank you very much. Yes, I got it.
And we share with our fellow Americans who may not have a transgender child just what it's like not to be the perpetrator of attacks, as many Americans are made to fear including with these transgender bathroom bills that we saw in North Carolina or that we saw recently in Texas, but to acknowledge that transgender children are far more often the victims than they are the perpetrators of those attacks. And if we include education in our public schools, in addition to traditional instruction, the full social and emotional well-being of every child, regardless of who they are, not only is that child going to do better, that class is going to do better, that community is going to do better, and we as a country are going to do better.
First and foremost, I think we have to pass the Equality Act. That's important. What we had before to deal with hate crimes was we had a position in our administration within the Department of both Department of Justice as well as within Homeland Security, a provision to keep watch on these groups that we know are out there, like terrorist groups. They're similar. Know are out there to be able to follow without violating their First Amendment rights, to be able to follow what they're doing and follow up on threats that come forward, because they come forward in many different fora. I think that it's really important that we start early. We start early and we begin to acquaint all our children. My son, Bo, who you knew, met, who died, my son started an organization to deal with children of abuse, bullying, and also those engaged in LGBTQ issues, particularly young people. We allow the homophobes to be able to control the agenda. My dad was dropping me off so he'd go around the block, I'd run and get the application. And two well-dressed men kissed one another as I was opening the door. And I hadn't seen that before. And I turned around and one walked off to the DuPont building, one walked off to what used to be called the Hercules Corporation. And I looked at my dad, and he just looked at me and said, "It's simple, honey. They love each other. It's just basic. There's nothing complicated about it." That's how I was raised, for real. And I went on to say that I did not have any problem whatsoever with same-sex marriage. It never even crossed my mind. In my State Department, not a joke, we will have a special office that's devoted directly to promoting LGBTQ rights around the world, It's really important that we, in fact, begin to educate people about what's going on. Because, for example, when I came out and when I publicly stated, well,
that would be news if you.
I got something to tell you.
I kind of figured it out a while ago.
The idea, it's normal. It's normalized. It's not anything strange. It's not strange. That's the generic point. And the more people know that, the more they understand it. Remember, Anderson, back 15, 20 years ago, we talked about this in San Francisco. It was all about, gay bathhouses. And it's all about round-the-clock sex. It's all, come on, man. Gay couples are more likely to stay together longer than heterosexual couples.
I want to just know, if you are elected as president, will you have a group of transgender people to counsel you or advise you?
Shia?
Shia.
All right. I absolutely would do that. I absolutely will make sure both that my administration looks like America, that it is inclusive, and that we listen to people, listen to transgender individuals who are the ones experiencing both the challenges and the opportunities that are created because of the policies that are passed in Washington, D.C., in our state capitals, and at city halls across the United States.
For 1/3 of countries still consider homosexuality a crime. What will your administration do to advance the rights of the LGBTQ community worldwide and target regimes that still violently infringe upon these human rights?
You're right. Throughout the world today, we have countries that are openly violating the human rights of the LGBTQ community, in some cases subjecting them to injury and to murder. What I believe is that the United States needs to stand up for human rights, including the human rights of people from the LGBTQ community, and to make foreign aid contingent upon countries improving in that regard. Because I don't think that it's enough for us to just say words. We actually have to take action. We have to make that meaningful, and I would do that as president. I also believe that our asylum policies, for instance, should reflect our values. I support the Equality Act. I would work to pass that. A lot of people in the LGBTQ community that are also people of faith. They're religious. They believe. And I would make sure not only that we appoint people, including members of the LGBTQ community, to the cabinet, to the White House staff, and other positions in the administration. Illinois became the first state to require that in its public school curriculum that LGBT history be taught. I believe that one of the things that we need to do is that we need to make sure that we raise a generation of young people who have a greater understanding and more appreciation for all of our American family, who doesn't just see the LGBT community as different and doesn't see the LGBTQ community as making a choice or choosing a lifestyle, but understands that that is who people are. That is identity. And when it comes to the bisexual community, I think that that's equally true. And so I'll make sure that those voices are at the table, and also that we do what we can to raise a generation of Americans that is understanding, as we would hope that people should be. One of the most effective movements of the last half century has been the movement toward marriage equality and expanding equality for the LGBTQ community. And that was the result of tremendous organizing. I don't believe that these companies should be able to discriminate because they say they have a religious belief against the LGBTQ community, that should be prohibited by law. I believe that we should build on the work of President Obama and the Obama administration, including to make sure that bisexual voices are represented in the administration and that they're part of the feedback and the input that we get going forward on administrative actions and also as we push legislation.
Should the federal government give funding to any religious nonprofit organizations that oppose same-sex marriage? For example, an adoption agency that won't work with LGBTQ parents?
Yeah, I think that you have got to have agencies that follow the law. And that's one of the reasons that I want to pass the Equality Act. I think that's really important. And I also think that you've got to recognize adoption for gay families. I've been involved, I'm actually head up the adoption caucus, little known fact, in the U.S. Senate, and did a lot of work on this topic when I was county attorney to speed up adoptions. And there are so many loving gay LGBTQ couples that want to adopt kids, and we should make it easier.
Evangelicals calling themselves Christians are claiming that being forced to do business with gay people infringes upon their religious freedom. But my husband Paco and I were married in a beautiful Lutheran church ceremony by a congregation that embraces our love for each other. Isn't our religious freedom being violated by those who wish to discriminate against us?
Mm-hmm. First of all, our Constitution, as you know, has been founded on a separation of church and state. And we can have different faiths in this country, but the law rules, and the law rules when it comes to discrimination and all kinds of other things. And I can just tell you that I will appoint Supreme Court justices that understand that. That's number one. Number two, my own faith, just because you talked about yours. Actually, my church in Minnesota was the first open and affirming church in our state. It's called First Church, so that's good. It's a UCC church, and the third in the country. And so that is the faith that I raised my daughter in and that I grew up in the last few years. And so I just think that that's got to be a big part of it too, is to recognize that there are other faiths, and one faith doesn't trump another faith.
Senator, the majority of your campaign, you said that you should be the nominee because you could negotiate with other politicians from across the aisle. What would be your strategy when it comes for pushing for LGBT legislation on LGBT rights and getting support from Congress from members who are not so very pro-LGBT?
You mean there's some of them? No. It is great to be here, and I want to thank you so much for that question. It is time to pass the Equality Act. And one vote, that was the margin that gave us marriage equality by the U.S. Supreme Court. So you think about that. Think about it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 votes. And if we can flip 5 Senate seats, we'll pass the Equality Act the next day. Role models, it is education, and it is making sure that we fight at every level. Yes, the federal level, but also the state and local levels. One of my favorite stories of youth was a high school in Minnesota that actually had 8 suicides in just a few years, and 2 of them were LGBTQ members. And this high school went through a really hard time. Well, then they had the vote for the heart dance royalty, and the students voted for a lesbian couple. And the school wasn't going to let them march down. And so a federal judge, who I actually had recommended to President Obama, was the one that brought in the school and brought in those 2 young girls and had a mediation. And out of it came the grace and dignity for the school. And those 2 walked into that with that line of royalty hand in hand. So it is lifting people up, using our laws to do that, but also using the education system to do that.
That is one of the most handsome haircuts I've seen. Were you about to say the same thing?
I was going to say
Thank you very
haircut.
much.
All right.
You are a beautiful man.
All right.
Same-sex female couples received equal amounts of paid leave to different sex couples, while same-sex male couples got equal amounts of leave in only 4 of those countries. As president, what is your plan to make paid parental leave equitable amongst all new parents?
Thank you very much. Because we know that same-sex male couples have a lot of challenges when it comes to parenting. First of all, there are discriminatory laws in adopting in this country still, and we need to make sure that same-sex couples have equal access to adoption as well. Parenting is such a fundamental urgency in this country. And to see the challenges that parents are having, struggling to hold down a job, struggling to find affordable childcare. We need to be a country that goes amongst developed nations from one of the last that's helping and empowering parents to being up at the first. And this is why my support for everything from paid family leave to expanding the child tax credit are really urgent. And those plans are going to apply equally to everyone. As mayor of my city, the second flag I raised was the pride flag. And I said I wouldn't conduct any marriages until everyone could be married. You can be sure. So first of all, very clearly, it is a national emergency. The majority of the terrorist attacks in this country since 9/11 have been right-wing extremist groups. The majority of them have been white supremacist and hate groups. And I will elevate as President of the United States an office on hate crimes and white supremacy to make sure it is a presidential level effort to protect our country as a whole. But I'm not stopping there. We need to have a Department of Justice that recognizes this as a problem and investigates hate crimes. For me, I cannot allow as a leader that people are going to use religion as a justification for discrimination. We need to have laws in this country, and this is why the Equality Act is one of them, that set parameters that do not allow people to discriminate. And I will take this not just in making sure that happens in our schools and in education, but it also has to make sure it happens in healthcare, which we now see discrimination being done around insurance. It means to make sure we do this globally. Why is the United States of America not using its power on the world to begin to stand up on the global stage against the outrageous violence and discrimination against LGBTQ citizens around the world?
Gay men were permanently deferred from donating blood in the U.S. because of outdated draconian regulations not supported by science. The FDA has only recently reduced the ban to 1 year after intercourse. Gay folks should never be discriminated against, but it's particularly painful when our community wants to help after a disaster or a mass shooter targeting our community, as in the case with Pulse. Will you commit to working with the FDA to remove this harmful ban?
2 words, absolutely yes.
As the Democratic Party has made it clear, this is an issue, this is a priority for us. We believe that equal means equal everywhere. But marching every year in the Pride Parade to say specifically that LGBTQ youth have their own space in the LGBTQ community and their own space in the American community, I think is really important in this.
The 2012 campaign for Senate, you criticized a judge's ruling that granted transition-related surgery to a transgender inmate. You said, I don't think it's a good use of taxpayer dollars.
Right.
Do you regret that?
Yep. No, it was a bad answer. And I think it was a bad answer. And I believe that everyone is entitled to medical care and medical care that they need. And that includes people who are transgender, who it is the time for them to have gender-affirming surgery. I just think that's important. And the appropriate medical care.
So if you help people get to where they want to be, you also have to protect them as what they are. Do you think that a crime against somebody who is transgender should be punished as a hate crime in statute?
You know, I think we could if we think that's going to be the most effective way to make change. So I'm open to this. But I'll tell you what I really want. I want a Justice Department that takes this seriously. I want to create a Justice Department that says these crimes matter. And when they're not federal crimes, when they are state crimes, in the same way that our Justice Department is empowered to step in if a state is failing to enforce laws and as a result is leaving women unprotected, is leaving people of color unprotected. The same should happen for LGBTQ people. We need a Justice Department that is on the side of the people, all of the people. Everyone around the world who has something to sell wants to get to you, wants to get to the American consumer. Why? Because we buy a lot of stuff, right? And so everyone wants to be able to come and trade with us. And we negotiate all kinds of trade deals to let them do that at most favored nations clauses and that keep the tariffs low or non-existent when they come to sell. We need to use that leverage to say, if you want to come and sell here, then you have to meet some basic standards. You want to sell your stuff, you got to meet some standards. And to say, we want to use the leverage of our markets to raise human rights standards all around the globe. And I think we can do this. We need to use our leverage and work harder.
You have 70 UN member countries that criminalize same-sex marriage.
Yep.
You have 68, I think, that criminalize same-sex acts. You have 6 that make it a death penalty event if they get it. So sometimes coaxing isn't enough. What do you think is the hardest line you could take? With someone like Saudi Arabia, the former VP, Biden said they don't have a lot of redeeming social characteristics. Well, does that mean you don't do aid to somebody like that? You don't do trade with them?
So I think you start out by saying, look, it's all going to be on the table. You want to come and do trade with us? Then let's talk about what your full record is.
How would you be an advocate for the queer community in the U.S., even without being everyone's preferred definition of gay?
There is a long and proud tradition and history in the gay, lesbian, and transgender community of protest, and we applaud them for their protest. When did you first know you were gay? I mean, what was it as a, I mean, I think of a lot of us, can identify, I mean, I think I was probably like 5 or 6 and I knew something was up. Yeah, I mean, was there, and I'm wondering what was that initial, teenage year, what were those years like?
I'm very mindful of the fact that my experience as a gay man, but as a white cisgender gay man, means that there are dimensions, for example, of what it's like to be a black trans woman that I do not personally understand. But I also think the diversity within the LGBTQ plus community is part of what we have to offer right now. Our community, our country is so torn apart, we're so fragmented. And here we have the LGBTQ plus world that is everywhere. We are in every state, every community. Whether folks realize it or not, we're in every family. And that means we can also have the power to build bridges. There are still states, I live in one of them, that don't have hate crime legislation. And we need to make sure that our legislation reflects our values as a country and the insistence that nobody be singled out or harmed because of who they are. But that's just the beginning of what we've got to do for LGBTQ youth.
Current FDA blood donation policy prohibits gay men who have been sexually active in the past 12 months from donating blood.
When tragedy hits and blood donations are desperately needed, many gay men are unable to donate simply because they're in a relationship with a partner of the same sex. Would you support a shorter deferral window, and what would your administration do to allow someone like me to be able to donate blood when it's needed?
And I remember the moment when I realized that, unlike most initiatives that I spearhead, I can't lead by example on this one because my blood's not welcome in this country. And it's not based on science, it's based on prejudice. So when I'm president, I will direct the FDA to revise the rules based on evidence, based on individual risk factors, and without regard to the prejudice that has driven the current policy that you're describing.
I actually want to follow up on that. Obviously, as you know, people living with HIV face tremendous stigma in many parts of this country and unfair treatment as well. HIV medication makes the virus undetectable. And somebody who's undetectable, and I don't think a lot of people maybe who are watching tonight understand this yet, that if somebody is undetectable, they cannot transmit the virus to a loved one. Yet in many states in this country, there are criminal statutes. You can be sent to prison if you have not informed a sexual partner that you are HIV positive, even though you have no way of transmitting the virus to them. Right. It's an antiquated law based on old science. Is that fair? Is that something you would seek to change?
It's not fair, and it needs to change. The transgender military ban is an outrage. So what will I do as president? I will, needless to say, put an end to that, but also seek to lead a military and a country that cultivates that sense of belonging, that responds to that crisis of belonging by ensuring that our military leads the way in inclusion, even as we work to make sure that civilian employers and communities across the country are doing the right thing too.